Hi, this is Bastiaan, and today we're going to take a look at an opening system called the Lion. And the Lion is basically a system using elements of the perk, the inverted Philidor and the old Indian defense. But it was played for 40 years, I believe, by a Dutch player named Leo, and he wrote a book on it. And since Leo is Latin for lion, this system is also known as the Lion system. And the Lion system has three main variations. It's the Lion's Den, the Lion's Claw, and the Lion's Head. So I'm going to show you three games played against club players rating from 1700 till 1900 ELO to give you a feel about the system. Now, the system is easy enough to learn because black uses the same opening against all of white's moves. So why not add it to your repertoire? But I don't play it against 2000 plus rated opponents myself. But if you're looking for a fun game of chess, why not play it a few times, since it takes really no effort to learn the system. First game starts out with e4, d6. So this perk move is the first move of the lion. White plays d4. So we're seeing typical development of white. 9 out of 10 times games will open this way. The purpose of the d6 move is to prepare support for an e5 break. So we play knight to f6, attacking the pawn. And the pawn can advance, but it will be recaptured. So knight to c3 is played. Knight b to d7, and this is the lion. White continues with knight to f3, protecting e5, but our d7 development also supports e5. So we are overprotecting, or have been overprotecting e5. So e5 is still possible. And I play e5, and this variation is called the Lion's Claw. White continues with bishop to b5, and I don't really like this move by white because it does attempt to pin the knight, but black can simply play c6. And when I play the lion, more than half the time I play c6 and queen to c7. I don't know why, but it always seems to work out. c6 also supports d7 pawn breaks and activates the queen's diagonal. Of course, in this case, with the bishop on b5, c6 is called for. And white has to make a retreat already. Bishop to c4, a better spot for the bishop. But because now I have a pawn on c6, I can play b5, immediately chasing the bishop away even further. So the bishop retreats again to d3. I play bishop to e7, getting ready to castle. Note that in the lion, one can also play h6 to prevent the knight jump or the bishop jump to g5. However, this isn't played in this game. White plays bishop to g5, and now I play h6, and white has to make a choice here if he wants to take on the knight or not. If he does, he will lose the bishop pair. He can retreat, or he can keep the pressure with bishop to h4. But bishop to h4 is a mistake, because after bishop to h4, white can play g5, kicking the bishop away even more. Bishop to g3 is forced. And now g4, attacking the knight. So the knight moves. but the knight was needed to protect d4. There's still a lot of pressure in the center, so then pawn takes pawn, and I get tempo attacking the knight. So the knight has to flee, perhaps counterattacking the pawn. But now we can see the diagonal of the king being open, and as said before, the queen has an open diagonal as well. Queen a5 check, if c3 to block, pawn takes pawn, knight can recapture, and black can continue his attack with b4, for instance, which leaves black in the best position. So after h6, retreating to keep the pressure with the bishop doesn't work, and white has to make a choice to exchange and lose the bishop pair, or to admit that his attack is failed and retreat the bishop. So white wisely retreats the bishop, so I'm not that easily intimidated by white's attacks. And this is already the second attack of white against the lion that has failed. Yet there's not a clear advantage for either side yet. I continue with castling. Black plays a4, opening up the rook, and perhaps trying to gain a pawn on b5. I pass the pawn with d4, attacking the knight. We note that this pawn has no longer any protection. Knight to a2, attacking the pawn twice. And now I could play a5, which is perfectly reasonable. But instead I play bishop to b7, shadowing the bishop. White quickly grabs the pawn, but now I grab the pawn on d4, and the pawn cannot be recaptured, because if knight takes pawn, I get a fork. So I'm getting my pawn back. White instead plays queen to d2, activating the queen on the diagonal and opening up options to castle kingside or queenside. I play c5 anyways, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to a5, attacking the queen. Queen goes to e8 on the half open file opposite to the king. Queen to f4, developing the queen. But I play knight to h5, and again it looks like white attacks is failing. Queen retreats to d2, but I now have a knight on h5 where it doesn't seem very well placed, and moving it to f5, f4 doesn't seem possible. So I play f5 instead. Now white may take on the pawn, but let's see what happens. If pawn takes pawn, I can play bishop takes knight, pawn recaptures, and we can see that white has tripled isolated pawns on the f-file, and I have a rook on the half open file. So this is bad for white. Game may continue with bishop to g5 check, attacking the queen. Queen blocks. Knight to f4, attacking the queen, and black has a winning position. So pawn takes pawn is a bad move for white. White instead plays bishop to c4 check. I need to move the king, and now white grabs the pawn. I recapture with the rook. A bishop to e2, trying to prevent the discovered check. Knight goes to f4, trying to add more pressure, also attacking the pawn on g2. And now white plays king to f1 in order to protect the pawn. And this seems illogical at first, because it looks like white can simply castle. But if white castles, I can play queen to g6, threatening mate on g2. And if g3 is played, I can play knight to h3 check. King can either move to g2, after which I can bring the knight in or the queen into g4. So after queen to g4, my knight is protected, and I have 3 pieces attacking the knight on f3. And the only defense that white has is to bring another defender, queen to d3. There are no other possibilities. After which knight to f4 is a royal fork. So this is clearly losing for white. Otherwise, instead of king to g2, white may try king to h1. But then we have a quick mate. After rook takes, bishop recaptures, and bishop takes checkmate. So castling kingside is a dead trap for white. If white were to castle queenside, he will lose the bishop on e2, check. Queen recaptures, then bishop to g5, check, with a discovered attack on the queen. So it's easy to see why castling will lead to a lost game for white. White plays king to f1 to protect the pawn. So now it all makes sense. I play knight to e5. Now, if white were to play knight takes knight, I can play bishop takes pawn check. King moves, say, to e1. King can move to e1 or g1, but he will always be on a open or a half open file. And I can recapture the knight on e5. So basically, white's king will be weaker and he will have lost the pawn if he tries to exchange knights. So white doesn't exchange. He plays knight to e1 instead, saving the knight, saving the pawn, and adding extra protection on the pawn on g2. So I take it on anyways. And white recaptures, and now I'm just crashing through. Bishop takes. King recaptures, so I'm down a minor piece for a pawn. But again, when hunting the king, it doesn't really matter. Queen to g6, check. King to f1. Rook takes pawn check, sacrificing the rook. King recaptures. Bishop h4 check. King to f1. Rook to f8 check. Bishop to f3 to block the check and give the queen more mobility. Rook takes bishop check. King to e2. Now queen to g4, threatening among other things a check and a discovered check. And there's not much that black can do against it. If he plays, say, king to d1, rook to f1 is a very nice discovered check, double check and mate. Rook h to f1 was played, and now there's a mate. Rook to e3 checkmate. So a very nice mating pattern where I sacrifice 2 pieces. And this is an example of the first line system. So let's take a look at the second. Another game played at club level against an opponent rated between 1700 or 1900 ELOs. I don't remember exactly. Game starts out with e4, d6, d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, knight b to d7, knight to f3, e5. So we're seeing the lion's claw. But now instead of bishop to b5 like the previous game, white plays bishop to c4, immediately developing the bishop to the good square. I play bishop to e7, white castles, black castles. And this variation is still book and is called the lion's head. Game continues. Bishop to e3, so we're seeing a proper development this time by white. I play knight to b6, attacking the knight on c4, the bishop on c4. White plays bishop to b5, and once again I play c6, and I almost always play this move as said before. Bishop goes to d3, queen to c7, again the queen to c7 move. Bishop to g5, and we remember in the previous game I played h3 in order to kick away the bishop or make it retreat, and I explained why kicking back the bishop was bad for white. But now I play bishop to g4, developing symmetrically. So I'm taking another approach now. White plays bishop to e2 to prevent an attack on the queen or doubling the pawns. Only now h6 and bishop to h4. And we can see that the same tactic that we threatened in a previous game, that is pawn to g5 to kick back the bishop, then g4 to threaten the knight, is no longer possible, because this time we have a bishop blocking the way. So I need to find something else. And there's another attack here for black, and that is simply knight takes pawn. And black has gained a free pawn, and we can see that our queen is excellently placed, protecting the bishop on e7. So knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, so white has two attacks. White chooses bishop takes bishop. Bishop takes bishop, threatening the queen, forcing a recapture. Queen takes bishop, queen takes bishop. And we have traded down some pieces, with black being a pawn up. And black is in no danger of losing the pawn again. For instance, if pawn takes pawn, queen recaptures. So knight to c3. Again, I can't capture the pawn, because if pawn takes pawn, I lose the queen. So developing the rook to the half open file seems advisable. And now of course I am threatening pawn takes pawn. So rook to d4 to protect the pawn. I simply exchange. Everything gets exchanged, and we are approaching the endgame with black being one pawn up. There's no problem defending that pawn. d5, h4, rook to e8, two rooks on open file, b4. So I'm going to speed up the game a little bit. a6, covering a b5 pawn break. g4, so white is trying to advance the pawns on his king side. Knight to c4, king to g2, rook to a8, because I'm going to try and push the a pawn. This will open up the a file, or make it half open perhaps, and leave white with two isolated pawns. So white plays a4, rook to e5, protecting the pawn, because if I play a5, white may play b5 and undermine my protection of this pawn. So rook to e5 is played, king to g3. So Sadly, there are no real good moves left for white. A5, black exchanges. Pawn is still protected. F4. So now the rook has to retreat. F5, knight to E3, threatening the pawn. But there's a hidden second attack in this development. Rook goes to C1 to protect. And now the final tactic of the game, knight takes pawn check, gaining another pawn. Pawn takes knight, rook to E3 fork, gaining the minor piece back and a pawn. And now it's all over for white. So king to F2, I recapture. King to E2, rook to H3, grabbing the third pawn. Rook to H1, take, exchange. King to F3, rook to E4, so we are boxing in the enemy king. King to G3, king to F8. So basically I'm going to step up with my king. Now I have a choice, because this pawn is protected, but white can't protect both pawns. His king is of no use because it is boxed in. King to F3, and now I can take advantage of this opportunity and trade off the rooks. Grab two more pawns. Now simply promote. Three queens is sufficient. And a checkmate. So that's the second game with the lion. And now we are going to see the third variation, the third main variation. E4, D6 again, D4, knight to F6, knight to C3, knight B to D7. So we're seeing the same setup. It's easy enough to remember for black. And now white plays F4 instead of developing the knight. And black plays E5, breaking through in the center. And this is called the lion's den. And the main difference is that it's not the knight that's covering the E5 square, but now it's the pawn on F4 that is serving the same purpose. White takes, I recapture. White takes, I recapture. And now we get a queen swap variation. Queen takes queen and king recaptures. And there's a bit of a trade-off here. So black's king can no longer castle, but as compensation, black has two pieces developed, and white has an isolated pawn in the center. I believe that this slightly favors black. If you know how to continue, bishop to G5, perhaps hoping to double up the pawns. And now C6. And as said before, I almost always play C6. And once again C6 is played, but this time for a different purpose. There's no queen to C7, but I'm planning to play king to C7. And after the bishop develops, the rook can develop to E8 or D7. So basically this is manual castling, and it gets my pieces out. White takes, I recapture, so I'm getting isolated double pawns on the f-file. No problem. White castles long with check, but I'm just in time to play king to c7, knight to f3, so white continues development. Bishop to e6, bishop to e2, rook to g8, why not, threatening the pawn and putting the rook on a half open file. G3, knight to g4, looking to remaneuver to e3. White plays rook to f1, hoping to threaten perhaps the double pawns later in the game, but Knight to e3 forces the rook to remaneuver to e1. Bishop to h6, threatening discovered check and also protecting the knight. King to b1, rook a to d8, so I'm getting my rook out on the open file. Bishop to d3, b5, so now I'm threatening a pawn storm on the king side. Knight to e2, a5, knight f to d4. I have no problem with black taking on my bishop because it will help me with my issue with my double pawns. So he's free to do so. a4, I continue my pawn storm. h3, cutting off retreats for the knight. Basically, c4 is the only viable solution if I want to retreat. King to b6, so I'm moving forward with my pawns as well as my king to support. g4, so we're seeing another pawn storm on the queen side, or the king side I mean. c5, threatening the knight. Knight goes to f5 and attacking my bishop. So I capture the knight and the pawn recaptures. And now as we can see that our bishop on h6 has become more powerful and cuts off the escape from white's king on b1. Also, we have to move our bishop because it's under attack. Bishop retreats to c8, b3, pawn takes pawn, and white is forced to recapture with the a pawn because of course the c pawn is needed to protect against the rook. So pawn takes, bishop to b7, looking to play rook on open file, rook to a8, rook to f1, c4. So it looks like I'm losing a pawn. Pawn takes, pawn recaptures, and bishop takes. So I've lost a pawn, and there's an attack on second attack on the pawn on f7. So what's the point? The point is discovered attack on e4, so I can grab that pawn back with the discovered attack on the rook. But white wants his free pawn, grabs the pawn and counterattacks with an attack on the rook on g8. So I move the rook, attacking the knight on e2, but blocking my own attack on the rook on h1. White plays rook to e1 to protect the knight. So it looks like I'm simply down a pawn. But now I simply play rook takes knight with two attacks on both rooks. And if rook takes rook, there's no longer any protection. I can grab the rook on h1, and I'm up a minor piece and for a pawn. And that's the end of the game for white. White plays c4, king to c5, king to b2, rook to d4, bishop to g7, and it will become impossible to protect the pawn on h7. I could try with rook to d7, but I'm not going to bother to do so. Bishop to e4 to counterattack. So bishop takes, protecting the pawn on f5, but I can grab a pawn on c4. King to b3, rook to d4. So I'm going to use my majority in pieces to get another pawn on f5 and finally on h3. So I just need to move the king and the pieces in. Check. Now I've got two pieces. Although this bishop is still needed to cover the rook. So I'm bringing it in as a third piece. Check. Now it's just a matter of promoting to a queen and mating in a few moves. So that was the final main system of the lion. Use the lion's den, called the lion's den. I hope you enjoyed watching these three variations, and you may consider giving the lion a chance in some of your club games. Thanks for watching, and please leave a comment. Have a great evening.